Well, tonight we're going to talk about the wrestle, right? So there is some sort of correlation and connection with that. You know, I was thinking about this week. Anna and I were in Colorado visiting her family. We got back late last night. And for the past 2 weeks, actually, this has been kind of on my heart. Talking about the wrestle. I think many times in life, have you found yourself frustrated, annoyed, angry, uncertain at where you're at in life or who you've become or what you're experiencing? And you encounter kind of a struggle or a conflict. And sweet, eloquent words aren't enough to get you through it. Or even your own abilities are not enough to get you through it. And you catch yourself kind of in this grapple. And I think it's where our faith becomes real, vulnerable, and even raw. In the midst of these times, in the midst of the wrestle. So I want to read a passage of scripture with you from Genesis chapter 32, 22 through 31. It's a story about a man named Jacob. And I'm going to read verse 22. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. It's a great word, Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Now, when I read this passage, what I want to do is I want to pull from the passage and the text and reflect on the truth that we see there and how it's applicable to our lives and correlates with the grand narrative, the story of who Jesus is and who God is for us and for all humanity. So can we do that? Can we dive into it a bit? Who likes stories here? You all like stories. You go to the movies? You like movies? Yeah. Yes, and you like stories. I'm trying. Okay. I'm just I've been resting for 5 days in Colorado, high altitude. You know what I'm saying? Okay. So Jacob comes to a hard place in his life. I'm going to go into a little bit about who Jacob was and all that. But first, I want to break it down into 5 parts, what we just read. So you're like, oh, those are a lot of words up there. Break it down. Jacob's at a hard place. He sends everything and everyone away. He's left alone. His wives, his children, all of his belongings. He wrestles with God, experiences pain in the midst of the wrestle. His name gets changed because he endured. He walks away with a limp. All right? Now let's jump into who Jacob is a bit. I'm not going to go long here, I promise. If you're like, I want to know details, start reading in Genesis, and you will hear all the details. Even ones and names and rivers and mountains. You're like, what does that mean? Just keep pressing through. Jacob started off his conflict with his brother, who is named Esau, his twin brother. From the second they came out of the womb, the story says, as Esau was coming out, Jacob's hand went around his ankle to pull him back. Conflict began between the two of them. At one point in their life, Esau, because he was technically the firstborn, even though they were twins, coming out first and all that, he had the blessing. He also had the birthright. So one time Esau comes back, he's really hungry. Jacob's making a meal. Esau was like the man's man. It describes him with hairy arms. So don't shave your arms, guys. It's not worth it. Don't be that guy in Gold's Gym. Okay. I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. I would just get razor burn. So when... out of control. Esau is like the man's man. He's out. He's hunting. All of a sudden, he comes back, and Jacob has been preparing a meal, and Esau says, I'm starving. I feel like I'm about to die. Please give me the food. And Jacob says, well, give me your birthright. No, come on, give me the food. Give me your birthright. Give me the food. Give me your birthright. And finally, Esau says, fine, take my birthright for a meal. And so in one sense, yeah, Jacob manipulates Esau to give him the birthright. This tension continues and goes on till Isaac, their father's getting old and he's dying and he wants to pass off the blessing. Now, some of you might say, well, that just seems like words. But no, the blessing when you read through the Old Testament is something much more than that. It's a promise from God of his faithfulness for you and your lineage. Provision, that wherever you go, wherever your children go, they will be blessed. And even in that sense, yes, having wealth, having provision, all those types of things. There was much in the Father's blessing, passing off the mental, the promise God made to Abraham was going to get passed off through there. So Isaac's kind of hard of seeing and doesn't know where his son Esau is, or Jacob exactly. Esau's out, and so the mother overhears this, and she loved Jacob more, and so she says, okay, listen, Jacob, we'll deceive your father to make him think that you're Esau so you can get the blessing. So a bunch of details that take place, but that's what happens. Jacob goes, he deceives his father gives him the blessing thinking he's Esau. It's actually Jacob. Then Esau comes in, the dad says, what? I thought I just gave you, figures it all out. They've been deceived. Obviously what happens? Esau gets what? You can answer back. What do you think he'd get? Angry, of course. Imagine this. You've been promised something your whole life. And all of a sudden, your sibling, who should be the closest, most supportive person to you, deceives your father, deceives you, goes behind your back and steals that from you. Rage is what he felt. So much that he said, I will get that blessing back that I rightfully deserve by killing my brother Jacob. And so Jacob overhears and he flees. He goes, he meets his uncle named Laban. He gets 2 wives. That's a whole other story. And now he's on his journey back to what he actually, through the blessing, deserves. The land, the fulfillment of that. He's coming back, but he knows his brother Esau is ticked. And so what he starts to do is he starts to make his way back towards that land and says, I've got all these ideas, these witty ideas, that will make my brother Esau not so angry. Because I hear Esau's coming with 400 men. He's going to kill me. It's been years. He's going to kill me. So this is what just took place. So he sends his family and everyone over that little river, everything that he owns, and he is left. Jacob is left alone. Uncertainty? Yeah. Fear? Yeah. Solitude? Yes. He is alone. All throughout Jacob's life, he had cunning ways. Sometimes they were deceitful. And how he could get by things. Or if he worked hard enough with his own skills and his abilities, he could get through it. But he was suddenly hitting a point where that just was not going to be enough. I guess you could say, in one sense, he was at his wit's end. He couldn't be witty to get out of this. He was trying everything he could. And then suddenly, an unnamed adversary steps in his way. There's points of struggles and conflict in our lives. God, why is this happening to me? God, I got this. My skills, my abilities, they'll make a way. Please just kind of step aside. Sometimes our reaction can try to be to do it on our own. In our own ability, in our own strength. I'll figure this out. Survival of the fittest. That whole thinking. I can do this. I've got the abilities. I've got the gifts. I've got the core talents. Step aside. I can do this. Even in the sense of you saying, God's made promises in my life. I'm pursuing God's will. Still trying to do it fully on your own. In your own gifts, in your own talents. And listen, Jacob's about to get delivered, and he does. Deliverance throughout the Bible comes in many ways. It can be in a moment, it can be through a process, a provision, but also a struggle. And a struggle that requires surrender. You might be in a struggle right now, in a point of conflict. You might be sitting here in this moment and you feel so alone. You feel so alone in the midst of what's about to take place. The wrestle. The wrestle is either happening or it's about to take place. Here's what I mean. This is what I feel tonight. One of two situations. This could be for 10 of you here. Could be for all of you here that you're going to land in one of these spots. First, you are doing your thing and then all of a sudden, wham! I just woke one of you up. School is so long this week. Who started school this week? Raise your hand. I'm just giving you a hard time. First week of school was so difficult for me all the time in college. I was falling asleep in my 750s. I'm like, I can't do this. So it's good that you disconnect. You come out on a Friday night. Don't think about your papers right now. They'll still be there tomorrow. Trust me. Sorry. Okay, good. So you're doing your thing, and then all of a sudden, wham, you've encountered the Lord in a struggle that's in the way of your own pursuits. There's suddenly a roadblock in your 5-year plan. There's a roadblock. This is in the way. This wasn't the plan. God, don't hinder my plans. Remember, you gave them to me. Now I'm doing them. Don't hinder my plans. You made these promises. Now I'm pursuing them. So please just get out of the way. That's the first situation. Second, you're at a place of uncertainty, confusion, frustration with your own life, and even God himself. God, why is this happening to me? Lord, why did this happen? I felt that you made promises in my life. Could have been years ago. Could have been this past summer. That I see no fruit. I have questions about my faith, your plans. I'm so confused. I'm so uncertain. Wherever you land, this is a place where your faith in God becomes raw. You become vulnerable. Things actually start to get a little messy. Jacob was at this place. He was saying, get out of my way. I have a plan. My brother Esau is ticked off. He's coming with 400 dudes. So what I'm going to do is every few miles, I'm going to have a lot of goats. Then I'm going to do a lot of livestock. And then I'm going to keep going that every few miles, it'll make him less and less mad. So he comes up and the servant says, your brother Jacob wants to give this to you. Thank you. A few more. Your brother Jacob wants to give this to you. Ah, sweet. My witty idea is going to lessen his frustration and his hatred. Lord, move. I've got this. I'm a little fearful. I'm frustrated. I'm uncertain on what's going to take place. And then all of a sudden, God is there. Now, some people say, why the daybreak? I'm just jumping into this because maybe one of you is like, daybreak, is it like a vampire? I know it's like, but yes, people were like, wait, is it a vampire? Because the guy says, hey, I've got to get out of here. It's turning into day, so I need to leave. But if you watch those new, what is those movies with that guy, the vampire guy, these new ones, there are like 4 of them. Twilight. Just want to see if someone knew what that was. Vampires don't die in the light, right? They have diamond. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, that's a side note again. I'm going on side notes tonight. Go with me. Walk with me on them. It's not a vampire. What we know of is that it's symbolic of God, who he is, that this struggle is taking place, a struggle with God. So all of a sudden, there it is, and the wrestle begins. Jacob leaps into it. Isn't it funny how it even says right there in the scripture, it's like it just jumps so quickly, it doesn't describe it. There's a man standing there in silhouette of the dark, and all of a sudden they started having words and started wrestling. No, it's just like, and a man was there, and they started wrestling. It was like this point of like immediate frustration. Have you been there before? Have you been in a place where you're like, just say one more thing to go wrong, and I'm going to lose it? I remember in college, I was with my friend. We were in the room, I didn't know how frustrated he was, so I was teasing him. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, yeah, saying some stuff. Oh, what, you went out with that girl you like stupid things just to be stupid. And so all of a sudden, he's like, what? And I started the joking wrestling, and I still don't know he's serious till suddenly, boom, it gets serious. Do you ever have one of those times? You're like, and all of a sudden it's madness, and you're rolling around, and we are choking each other out in a small dorm room. Mike Morio might have been there. He's a witness of it. So we are going crazy. And I realize in the middle of it, he is serious. He's frustrated. Something's bothering him. Just took that moment. It was like immediate, jump into it. Now times that, because his frustrations weren't nearly what was going on here, but times that by like 100, the uncertainty and the stress and the fear that's happening in Jacob's life. And all of a sudden, an adversary stands in his way between him and the land he is to inherit that has been promised to him, stands in the way. They wrestle until daybreak. And kind of the picture we get here, because even when you hear the terminology saying that God couldn't overcome him, what it is saying is it's showing the tenacity of Jacob. He wasn't stopping. All that frustration, all that moment, he is grappling and wrestling, and he cannot overcome God, obviously. But he's doing everything he can. And finally, it's about to be day. So that gives us the idea what? That they have wrestled through the night. I did a wrestling match for 3 minutes, and I threw up afterwards. And I was so ashamed of myself. What are you doing over there? Nothing. 3 minutes. If any of you are wrestlers in here, imagine wrestling through the night. Finally, it's about daybreak, and suddenly, God touches his hip, and it says that it was wrenched, that it was put out of its socket. If any of you have ever dislocated an arm, a leg, a hip, it is some of the most excruciating pain. I talked to a bunch of people who have had that happen, and I did research on it. And actually, many times, you know what happens sometimes when someone's shoulder is dislocated? They throw up because that's the only response their body can do at the amount of pain that's happening in that moment. So Jacob's hip gets hit out of its joint. The strongest part of his body for wrestling is now shriveled and not functional. And we read past that moment, and we just hear that next statement, and he cried out, and he clung and said, give me the promise, give me the promise. I want you to think about this. He's not just saying it. With all the pain that he's experiencing in the midst of this wrestle, he is clinging and screaming, give me the promise. No, let me go. Almost like, let me go. You can't do anything now. You're immobile. You can't move. You're on the ground. You're on your back. You're clinging with everything you have. And he's clinging with all that he has. Vulnerable and humbled. Please give me the promise. I won't let you go until you bless me. I want to invite the band to make their way back up here. When I saw that picture of Jacob clinging and screaming in pain, that's where I said, suddenly it's times like this where our faith becomes raw and real. See, Jacob's whole life, he was able to get through it on his own ability, his own gifting, his own talent, his own mind, his own way to use his wit, his endurance. And even in the midst of the wrestling match, he is doing it. He's going hard. He's doing his best, but suddenly he hits that limit. His hip dislocated. He's on his back. He's vulnerable. He's humbled. And he's crying out. My challenge to you tonight is, wherever you're at in the midst of this wrestle, don't let go. Culmination of this wrestling match was a desperate and humble cry. Jacob, everything he was on his back, unable to overcome, unable to take hold of whatever he thought he could have a grip on. This is what's so interesting. The entire time through Jacob's life, he inherited things because he was able to either deceive his way, manipulate his way, or fight through it. It was all in his own power. And God was not about to allow him to get this promise, this lineage, this blessing in his own power. He was pushing Jacob even to the ground with a dislocated hip to say, stop. It is only I who can give you this promise and this blessing. So finally he says, your name is no longer Jacob. It is Israel. You have wrestled with God and with man. You have overcome. Now you will be blessed. And it's out of that lineage that guess who comes? Jesus. Jesus comes out of that lineage of Jacob. But Jacob didn't receive that by his own power, his own abilities, his own strength. It was out of a desperate and humble cry. Real strength in divine weakness. He didn't let go. He held on. He didn't crawl away, limping, crying. He held on because he was desperate. He was desperate. Bless me. Come on, give me something more profound than that, Pastor Stephen. I'm going through this hard time, or I'm at this place. Don't let go. Keep holding on. Humble yourself. Be vulnerable. I mean, think about someone wrestling, crying, screaming on their back. This strong man who had so much is now on his back, screaming and grabbing. Humbled? You're going to see breakthrough. I promise you, you are going to see breakthrough if you hold on. If you're desperate, if you humble yourself, you surrender to the Lord and watch what takes place. Whether it's your perspective, whether it's your inner self, whatever in the midst of that you're walking through, don't let go. That's why I said it's raw. Because I think sometimes we come to church, we come to our walk with God, and we think it's just going to be picture perfect or really nice and all problems are taken away, and that's not true at all. And there's times in our lives where we hit this wrestling point. I hit a deep wrestling. For many years, I wrestled God with what his plans were and what I felt my plans were. I'll be honest with you guys. I wrestled God to go into ministry, and then guess what happened? I wrestled God. I said, I'll do it. I'll be a pastor, and I'll do a local church, and and all this, but I will never, ever go back to New York. I will never go back to Long Island, and I will never go back to Smithtown Gospel Tabernacle because I didn't love this church. I love this church with everything in me. Because something weird happened here? Not at all. I love that place, but I was like, I gotta trailblaze. I gotta do my own thing, go my own way. Years I wrestled it. Lord, I'm doing your will, right? Just get out of my way. You want me to do this? I'm doing this. Can you move? He's like, no. And I wrestled and I wrestled and I wrestled and I wrestled till I was flat on my back. And I said, enough, Lord. I surrender to you. I surrender to you. And now I'm reaping the fruit and the blessing in knowing amazing people and having the privilege and the humbling honor to shepherd you here at the table. God's blessing? Yes. Do I love being here? With everything in me. I had to wrestle him. That's just my story. And it's probably weak compared to what some of you are fighting and wrestling through. But I just want to encourage you. if you're serious about the kingdom of God, if you're serious about pursuing God, then you've got to be ready to surrender. And you've got to be ready to hold on. Don't let go. Let's stand up together. The wrestle is not easy, and your faith will be deepened, but it'll be raw. You've got to take those moments to cry out to the Lord. I remember I would walk, and I would weep, and I would scream, Lord. Other times in my life, Lord, what's happening? Why? Why would you let this happen? I would talk to mentors in my life, and they said, Stephen, don't walk away from God. Wrestle with that. Don't let go. Keep on keeping on. That doesn't make sense. In the world we live in, that's not logical. You hit conflict, turn around. Or overcome. Don't surrender. But in God's kingdom, when you surrender, you will see the depth of His blessing. It will go beyond you, just like it went beyond Jacob's, to where Jesus Christ came forth to bring ultimate freedom, ultimate surrender. It went beyond anything Jacob could ever imagine. It was eternal. All because someone wrestled and didn't let go and cried out. Some of you need to be humbled tonight. Some of you have pride. You become critical and cynical. I'm pursuing God. I'm going His way. This is kingdom ideas. This is good stuff. Stop. Surrender to the Lord. I got my drive, Pastor Stephen. I got my direction. I got my plans. I know where I want to go. Well, you can keep going that direction. But if you really want to see breakthrough, and you really want to see the fulfillment of God's promises, then surrender and desperately, in humility, cry out to Him. So tonight as we worship, I just encourage you in our time of response right now, search your heart. Lord, where am I at? Where am I at? Am I grappled with you right now? Cry out to Him. Am I about to walk away? Well, don't let go. Keep holding on. You just watch what He can do when you surrender all of yourself.